God was never meant to be a weekend experience. He was never designed to be visited only in moments of crisis, pain, or desperation. God is not an emergency contact. He is the source of daily life. Many people acknowledge God, but few allow Him to govern their everyday decisions. We invite Him into our problems, but hesitate to include Him in our planning. Yet the greatest transformation does not happen in chaos. It happens in consistency. God desires access not only to your struggles, but to your schedule. From the moment we wake up, life begins to make demands. Time pulls at us. Responsibilities compete for attention. Expectations speak louder than wisdom. In that noise, God becomes the still voice that brings alignment. Not confusion, not pressure, alignment. God gives identity before instruction. He defines who you are before telling you what to do. When identity is unclear, purpose becomes exhausting. But when God establishes identity, daily life gains direction. You stop chasing approval and start walking in assignment. God is deeply interested in ordinary moments, the way you speak, the way you work, the way you respond when no one is watching. Faith was never meant to be dramatic. It was meant to be consistent. God is honored not only by great acts, but by faithful routines. Daily dependence on God transforms discipline from burden into devotion. Obedience becomes intentional living. Structure becomes spiritual alignment. God uses daily patterns to shape long-term outcomes. What feels repetitive is often preparation. God does not shout directions. He cultivates sensitivity. Guidance is not always loud. It is often gentle. When daily life slows enough to listen, clarity emerges. God speaks through conviction, wisdom, restraint, and peace. Direction becomes something you sense, not something you force. In moments of pressure, God becomes strength, not by removing difficulty immediately, but by increasing capacity internally. He teaches endurance through persistence. He builds character through consistency. God is less concerned with speed and more invested in sustainability. Peace is not the absence of trouble. It is the presence of God in the middle of it. Daily life will still carry responsibilities, challenges, and uncertainty. But when God is central, peace becomes internal and unshakable. Stability is no longer dependent on circumstances. God also redefines success. He shifts the focus from achievement to obedience, from appearance to alignment. Daily life stops being a performance and becomes a partnership. You no longer strive to prove worth. You live from it. Every day becomes meaningful when God is involved. Every decision gains weight. Every step gains purpose. God was never meant to be added to life. He was meant to be the foundation of it. God speaks to identity before the world ever speaks to performance. Before society asks, "What do you do?" God asks, "Who are you becoming?" This order matters because when identity is misplaced, purpose becomes a burden instead of a calling. The world is quick to assign labels: success, failure, strong, weak, important, insignificant. These names shift with trends, opinions, and circumstances. One moment you are celebrated, the next moment forgotten. But God does not define people by seasons. He defines them by design. Long before achievement, recognition, or approval, God establishes worth. Identity from God is not earned, it is revealed. It is not built through comparison. It is discovered through relationship. When God defines a person, that identity remains steady even when circumstances change. Titles may come and go, roles may shift, and situations may evolve, but divine identity remains anchored. God gives purpose by first giving belonging. You are not trying to find your place. You are learning to function from it. When identity is rooted in God, purpose stops feeling like pressure. You no longer strive to prove yourself. You begin to express what has already been placed within you. Daily life becomes exhausting when identity is borrowed from external sources. Approval becomes oxygen. Validation becomes survival. But God offers a different foundation. He reminds the heart that worth is not dependent on applause and value is not measured by visibility. When God defines identity, comparison loses its power. Purpose flows naturally from clarity of identity. Confusion about direction is often a reflection of confusion about self. God does not rush instructions. He establishes understanding. When you know who you are, decisions become simpler, boundaries become clearer, priorities become aligned. God also protects identity before releasing responsibility. He builds confidence before calling for courage. He affirms belonging before demanding obedience. Daily life becomes a journey of expression rather than explanation. When identity is rooted in God, labels lose authority, fear loses control, expectations lose pressure. You stop living to meet standards that were never meant to define you. God defines who you are before the world tries to tell you who to become. God was never meant to be consulted only in moments of panic. He was never designed to be called upon only when life is falling apart. God is not a last option. He is a daily presence. Many people turn to God in emergencies, when pressure is high and options feel limited. They pray when confusion overwhelms them, when fear rises, when control slips away. Yet God desires more than crisis-level connection. He wants participation in the ordinary flow of life, where decisions are formed before problems are created. Daily guidance is quieter than rescue. It does not always arrive with dramatic signs or sudden breakthroughs. Often it shows up as wisdom, restraint, clarity, and inner conviction. God leads not by force, but by direction. When daily life slows enough to listen, guidance becomes evident. God is involved in small choices because small choices shape large outcomes. The conversations you enter, the habits you form, the boundaries you keep, the attitudes you carry, these are not insignificant to God. Direction in daily life prevents destruction in future seasons. When God is only approached in emergencies, faith becomes reactive. But when God is invited into daily decisions, faith becomes proactive. Life stops being about damage control and becomes about intentional living. God guides steps long before He needs to rescue consequences. Daily guidance also develops sensitivity. The more consistently God is consulted, the clearer His direction becomes. Discernment grows through practice, not panic. Listening becomes easier when it is habitual, not desperate. God does not override free will. He influences it through wisdom. He nudges, redirects, and aligns. Sometimes guidance appears as peace, sometimes as discomfort. Not every open door is approval, and not every closed door is rejection. Daily connection with God sharpens the ability to recognize the difference. In everyday life, guidance from God brings balance. It prevents emotional decisions, impulsive reactions, and unnecessary struggles. When God is involved early, clarity replaces confusion. Order replaces chaos. God's guidance is not meant to restrict life, but to preserve it. He sees outcomes before choices are made. He understands paths before steps are taken. Daily guidance is evidence of relationship, not religion. God walks with those who invite Him into the ordinary moments, before the storm, not just during it. God works through order long before He reveals outcomes. He values structure because structure sustains what inspiration begins. What God intends to last, He first teaches to stand. Discipline in daily living is not about restriction. It is about alignment. God uses structure to bring clarity to life. When days lack order, purpose becomes scattered. Discipline creates space for consistency, and consistency builds strength. God understands that passion without discipline fades, but discipline without passion still produces results. God uses process to develop patience. He rarely moves a person from calling to fulfillment in a straight line. Growth happens in stages, step by step, layer by layer. The process is not delay, it is development. Each season adds capacity for the next responsibility. Daily obedience shapes character more than occasional sacrifice. God is less concerned with dramatic moments and more focused on daily faithfulness. Small acts of obedience repeated over time form habits, and habits shape identity. Discipline becomes the training ground where trust is built. God does not rush destiny because destiny requires maturity. He strengthens the inner life before expanding the outer influence. When character is weak, success becomes dangerous. Discipline protects the future by preparing the present. Structure in daily living also teaches self-governance. God's discipline trains a person to manage time, emotions, and choices. Freedom without discipline leads to chaos, but discipline creates sustainable freedom. God does not control people. He teaches them how to lead themselves. Obedience refines sensitivity. The more consistently a person follows God's instruction, the clearer his direction becomes. Discipline sharpens discernment. It quiets distractions and aligns focus. Life begins to move with intention rather than reaction. God uses disciplined seasons to build endurance. Routine becomes spiritual when it is rooted in purpose. Repetition is no longer boring. It becomes strengthening. What feels ordinary is often where destiny is being shaped. Daily living under God's discipline transforms effort into impact. Structure turns potential into progress. Process turns calling into capacity. Obedience turns belief into action. God shapes destiny quietly through consistent discipline practiced long before recognition arrives. God does not reserve his strength only for extraordinary moments. He releases it most faithfully in ordinary ones. The quiet hours, the repeated routines, the unnoticed efforts. These are the spaces where God does some of his deepest work. Daily life is made up of small moments strung together. Waking up, showing up, trying again. God empowers these moments with endurance. Strength is not always felt as excitement. Often it is experienced as the ability to remain faithful when nothing feels new or dramatic. God gives strength to consistency. The ability to keep going when motivation fades is not human determination alone. It is divine support. Faithfulness in routine requires inner strength, and God supplies that strength quietly, steadily, without spectacle. Ordinary moments test endurance more than crisis moments do. Emergencies create urgency, but routine requires resolve. God sustains people in the long middle between promise and fulfillment, between preparation and manifestation. This is where endurance is formed. God's strength shows up as stability, the calm to respond wisely, the restraint to choose patience, the courage to stay committed. These are not dramatic acts, but they are powerful ones. God empowers daily faithfulness because destiny is built there. Routine life can feel invisible, but God sees it as foundational. He strengthens the heart to remain obedient when rewards are delayed. Faithfulness becomes an act of trust, and trust invites strength. God does not measure impact by intensity, but by consistency. A life sustained by his strength does not burn out quickly, it lasts. Endurance becomes a quiet testimony of divine involvement. Even when routine feels repetitive, God uses it to deepen character. He strengthens discipline, sharpens focus, and stabilizes purpose. The ordinary becomes sacred when God supplies the strength to stay present and faithful. God empowers people not only to start well, but to remain steady. His strength carries life through the everyday moments where purpose is quietly taking shape. God does not promise a life without uncertainty, but he offers a life with stability within it. Peace from God is not the absence of chaos. It is the presence of assurance. When the world feels unstable, God becomes the unmovable center that keeps the heart grounded. External circumstances change constantly. Situations shift. Plans fail. Expectations collapse. But God provides an inner anchor that does not depend on outcomes. Peace rooted in God remains steady even when answers are unclear. It is not built on explanations. It is built on trust. God's peace settles the mind when pressure increases. It quiets the noise of fear and the confusion of overthinking. Direction becomes clearer not because everything makes sense, but because the heart is no longer shaken by uncertainty. When peace is established internally, clarity follows naturally. God provides direction by first providing rest. A restless mind cannot hear clearly. Peace creates space for wisdom. In that stillness, guidance becomes recognizable. God does not rush decisions. He aligns hearts so choices are made from calm, not panic. Inner stability changes how challenges are approached. Instead of reacting emotionally, responses become intentional. God's presence steadies emotions, balances thoughts, and anchors faith. Direction stops being forced and begins to unfold. God's peace does not ignore reality. It strengthens a person to face it. It does not deny difficulty. It supplies courage. In uncertain environments, God becomes the constant reference point. When everything else moves, He remains. Direction from God is not always immediate, but it is consistent. Step by step, clarity emerges. Peace guards the heart, while direction shapes the path. When trust is established, fear loses its influence. God provides peace that holds steady even when the future is undefined. From that place of stability, direction becomes less about control and more about confidence in the one leading the way. As we reflect on the role of God in daily life, one truth rises above every idea we have explored. God is not distant from our lives. He is deeply invested in them. He defines our identity before the world assigns labels. He guides our steps before confusion turns into crisis. He shapes our character through discipline, strengthens us in ordinary moments, and becomes our peace when uncertainty surrounds us. God's purpose for life was never random or accidental. Each day, each decision, each quiet act of faithfulness is part of a greater design. When we allow God to lead daily life, we stop living reactively and begin living intentionally. We no longer drift. We walk with direction. We no longer strive. We live from assurance. You were never meant to carry purpose alone. You were designed to be a vessel, formed, guided, strengthened, and sustained by God. When you trust His process, discipline no longer feels like restriction. It becomes preparation. When you trust His guidance, uncertainty loses its power. When you trust His peace, fear no longer controls your future. This is an invitation to embrace daily surrender, not as weakness, but as wisdom, to allow God to shape not just your destination, but your journey, to believe that even in routine moments, even in waiting seasons, even in silent days, God is working with intention. Trust the one who sees beyond the present. Trust the process that is shaping your character. Trust the purpose already placed within you. When God becomes the center of daily life, purpose is no longer something you search for. It is something you live.